Well, shall we get the show on the road?
Yeah, let's get the show on the road.
Okay, perfect. Hello everybody. My name is Dr. Adelle Smener. I am your new host for Jane's Ambassador Office Hours. I'm so excited and honored to be here. This will be the first of many sessions together. We'll be together for like the next 6 months, talking through all things helping us grow our practices. A little bit about myself. My name is Dr. Adelle Smener. I am a PT. I am a certified strength conditioning coach, and I'm a clinic director at Prehab Physical Therapy based in Los Angeles. And today we are going to be talking about branding ourselves as practitioners, as a practice, as a clinic, as a company, wherever you're at, kind of in your journey. And I think that branding is so much more than just a logo. It's about having a really clear identity and voice, and one that guides your content, builds trust in your community, and helps clients get to know you. So I thought, who better to join me and lead this inaugural session today than Kinsey Carmichael, who is our marketing manager at Prehab. We've been working together closely for
Long time.
several years. And Kinsey was actually the first full time hire and helped grow Prehab to over 2.5 million followers across different platforms, leading our social media when she first started. And now she's evolved and now leading our brand strategy as well as cross functional marketing. And she's done a phenomenal job expanding, growing the Prehab brand. So I'm hoping that all of her insights today are really going to resonate with everybody. And I'm excited to kick things off. So thank you for listening to my spiel for the first 5 minutes and for joining me.
I'm excited. Yeah, we talk about this stuff all the time too, especially with pre-op PT. So I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm super excited. Like you just have such a wealth of knowledge and it's something that like we just don't learn about in school like at all.
Of
Um and so even when I think about like where prehab started and where it is now, I'm like, how did we even get here? And then I'm like, oh, Kinsey, that's how we got here.
No, oh my God, no, maybe one small portion, but like
One small thing.
especially Adele and I being at pre-op for so long, like we've seen it go through so many iterations and made
Oh my
like so
God.
many mistakes along the way. So yeah,
Crazy. It's
hopefully we can
crazy.
provide a little bit of value.
Yeah. Wow, it's actually really crazy to reflect on that. But without further ado, let's kick things off. And I thought that maybe it'd be interesting for you to just like kind of share your perspective on what brand identity really means. I feel like there's like a lot of confusion and misconception about like what branding is. And it is something that's super essential for all, businesses, but it's something again that we don't learn about in school as healthcare providers. So I guess for you, what do you feel like is important when it comes to brand identity?
Yeah, no, I completely agree that there's a lot of misconceptions about it. I think if I were to put it simply, it's like every single touch point that somebody has with you or your brand. So it's not just how it looks, which I feel like is like a misconception that it's more like visual based. It's what's actually, I think, a lot more important is how people feel when they interact with you. So with the example of a practitioner, your potential clients, like ones you currently see or potential ones, how do they feel prior to your session and how do they feel during it and how do they feel after it? And having that be clear, but also having, the expectations they have coming in met as well, like the continuity between that. That's really what I think brand mean. It's like it's their perception of you as a whole in every which way.
Why do you think so many people? Because I feel like for me, when I think of like a brand, like I immediately go to like a logo. Like this is like who they are. Like Nike is their swoosh. Like Prehab for us is like our brackets. Like where do you think that misconception comes from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think because visual brand identity is like the most obvious, if you see a brand and especially for bigger companies or if you're growing a brand that's outside of yourself, which it'll be important to distinguish that like personal branding versus like a company brand. But it's like, yeah, we all know the Nikes, the big brands where you can recognize them immediately. But when brands do that really well, like if you think of a Nike, you're not just associating with the visual brand, you're associating it with like the feeling that they elicit in you, which is like for Nike, it would be like empowerment or, with Red Bull, like energy, things of that nature. But as consumers, we just see that. Like we just see that. Like we're not like analyzing why we're thinking these things and all the work that's gone in behind the scenes to craft that perception.
Yeah, no, I think that totally makes sense. Because when you say that, the first thing that popped into my head too is like if when Nike first like started, it's not like they put a swoosh and everyone's like, "Ooh, like I'm gonna wear those shoes," right? Like it just they built that trust and authority in the space first. So like clearly even big companies that have these recognizable brands, whether it's like health, wellness or whatever, like they had to start somewhere different. And I feel like that's where most of us as healthcare providers actually are. Like we're not in that phase of like, oh, like what is like is our brand going to be like recognized like our logo? But um yeah, it's like how does Nike make you feel? How do patients and clients feel when they see you and interact with you? Um and I think that like that a lot of it happens, I guess, like before you interact with your clients and then like also like while, like you said, like after. So
Mhm.
curious if you had any insight in like distinguishing between those three different phases. Like, is that something that should be the same throughout? Does it vary? Like, what type of like consistency should there be when we're talking about branding across all those different touch points with our clients?
Yeah. Yeah. I think branding done well, it should lead to consistency in that way. I think I think the starting point is getting very clear on your own why, and the types of clients you want to work with, and like all these things that are related to you and the value you have to provide. And being real with yourself about like what are the experiences like for the clients that I work with, and branding gives you kind of like an avenue to communicate that clearly. So
Yeah.
you're trying to get prospective clients, trying to communicate what they will experience with you and how it's different from potentially other practitioners or just other things they could do instead of PT, clearly from the jump. And that will like build a foundation of trust, which is really, especially with healthcare workers, I think where it's so important is like, you've told me this so many times over the years that everything for healthcare workers, it's built on a foundation of trust.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much. And it's hard, I guess, like, how do we build like maybe the $1 million question when it comes to branding then is like how do we build that trust without ever meeting someone?
Hmm. Yeah, I think it happens over time. And honestly, depending on what we're talking about, like if we're talking about getting clients in person to see as a practitioner, if you have a touch point with them in person, like that is in a sense branding as well. And that's probably the strongest kind of branding you'll do because we've talked a lot about how referrals are the best source of, that is like the best type of client to get anyway. It's harder to build trust with people online, that's for sure. And it takes a lot more time. But the more that you're clear about like just being authentic to yourself and like the why and like really thinking through those questions and making sure that what you put out there reflects who you are, I think that's a good start. And then it kind of like evolves and happens naturally over time. It's definitely not something where you're like, okay, I'm going to create a brand and trust is important. So I'm going to make sure that they can trust me because I think I'm trustworthy because of XYZ. And it's just like set it and forget it. It's definitely like
Yeah.
building your practice over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so interesting because like yeah, like I think when someone's in person in front of you, like it feels a little bit more natural and that's when you start to develop that trust. It's so hard when I think about like even for our clinic, like how do we like market ourselves in a way where like when that person first calls or first goes to our social media page or first goes to our website, like how do we instill that feeling of trust from the get-go where they're willing to even give us a chance, right? And I feel like that is part of the branding. It's like how do we like get that like right off the jump? And I think you brought up a good point that it's about like feeling like authentic and genuine when you're doing it and like not super gimmicky, you know?
Exactly. And transparency builds trust, being honest about what people can expect. And you bring up a good point because that was why I wanted to distinguish between personal brand and like a company brand, because personal brand, I think, is a little bit more intuitive. It's like you're saying, when you're in person with somebody and it's just you, your service, like you know yourself, you know your tone, your voice, like what you have to provide. But when you're talking about our clinic, like Prehab PT, that goes beyond just you now. And that's where branding work becomes like really important because it's about the people within the company having a shared set of values and having like shared frameworks or principles or ways in which to communicate that so that there's consistency. because as soon as you add more people into the mix, it becomes harder to control for those variables, even if you all do share the same common like vision or reason for doing what you do.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction. I know we just chatted through like, this misconception of like logos being branding. What are some other misconceptions that you think practitioners maybe specifically have about branding themselves and like what's holding people back from, you know, marketing themselves effectively because of that?
Yeah, I think the visual one is a big one, but another one that I see more and more now, especially in the last like 5+ years, is that in order to create a brand, you have to create content and you have to be on social. Um, those it can be social can be an amazing avenue to portray that, but it comes down to your goals and it goes beyond just, like your social media content. I feel like people think like I need to build a personal brand automatically means I should create content online now just because of how accessible social is. And I think that's a bit of a misconception.
Yeah, it's so true because like yeah, I don't know. I don't know why. I think it's yeah, to your point, like it's because it's so accessible. It's the only way people know how to get themselves out there.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that social media is also so intimidating for so many people that if you're relying on that to build your brand, then now you like a lot of people likely feel stuck. Maybe they don't feel comfortable like being on camera, or maybe, even talking like on camera or something could be really intimidating. So I feel like that's like a really big barrier. And I also think social media is such a saturated like market where you're like, oh, everyone's already doing this. And I think it like almost like holds people back from feeling like they can do the same thing, even though it's like not the same thing. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, that
Yeah.
person, like for me, I'm like, that person treats ACL. So like I can't like do that because that person's like doing it better. And now
Mhm.
like that holds me as a practitioner back from doing that. Um, yeah, which I feel like is, a big barrier for a lot of people.
Totally. I think that's so true because it's daunting and it's overwhelming. And like we're all overwhelmed by just even consuming content right now. Never mind thinking about like how am I going
Especially when Love Island is all over your feed.
to Exactly. You see one TikTok and then all of a sudden it's like,
Yeah, exactly. 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 Talk
no,
about
I
branding. They've done a great job. Anyway, I digress. I digress.
it's so true. It's so true. And it is social's a little bit misunderstood in the sense of like because we all use social media, we all feel like we should understand how to create content for it. And I would argue, as someone who like the majority of my career was built in social, it goes so much deeper than that. Um, and it's not easy, in a sense, like it is, but it is all about thinking about you do have a unique POV, like everybody has something that differentiates them. And just because somebody else is doing the same type of content, like it's not really about like what you're posting, it's about like how you're posting it for you and what's like distinctly yours and what's your spin on things. But I think that is very common to feel. I think we all do. There's so many people doing this. Why would I even start? And I also think you maybe shouldn't. It really depends on your goals, whether or not you should even be on social media to begin with, honestly.
Can I ask like what are some goals you think that would like be like, yes, I should be on social media and work on my branding on social media versus what is a goal that you're like, oh, I don't really need to do that? Like what's something that
Yeah,
differentiates those?
I would argue that if you want to build an online community, social is a great place to be. If you want to more so grow your in-person practice, it's not that you shouldn't be on social media, but it's that that's not going to be the most efficient or effective way to probably grow your client base. What would be better, what would probably be more effective in most cases would be like local paid ads targeting like that way, or even like local marketing or working on referral systems and stuff like that. Just because you have so little control over who your content reaches. And I think it's a completely different conversation if we're talking about creating content to have a brand where it's more for like social proof and to showcase what your service or anything what you're about and what you have to provide versus utilizing social media to try to grow. And maybe that's actually the better distinction. Um, yeah.
So I think then it's like, so if we go down this rabbit hole, because I feel like a lot of people who are maybe joining us are like either solo providers or like have in-person brick and mortar clinics or facilities. If we're straying away from social media being like the main source of branding,
Mhm.
what are some other avenues that people should be focusing on? Is it like, do you brand via your website? Is it branding how do you brand yourself when you're talking to your neighbors, right? And like, how do we do that?
Yeah. Oh, I think you kind of nailed it because it's how you convey. Like, let's say you want to specialize in a certain type of demographic as a PT. Like, you want to see primarily if you're a pelvic floor specialist. Um, Everything that, the people that you would want to attract in, that's a very specific type of person. So it's like getting clear on who that is, or even looking at who do you currently treat? Like, are there clients that you really enjoy, like talk to them and get an understanding from them, like what was it that drew them to you, where did they find you, what's different about you, like what did they enjoy, all these things, and you'll start to pick up on key phrases of things that'll be like very telling for you to then try to leverage to grow. So it depends. I think it really depends. Like there's some clinics where there's a lot of foot traffic and that attracts a certain population, or like if you're in an area where there's a lot of offices, then you're going to have like office workers, and somewhere it's like maybe a little bit more natural like that. But I know with Prehab PT, we talk about this stuff a lot. And um, I think like the paid ads can be effective for sure, like local targeting, because with social, you don't have control over that. But with paid ads, you have control over like, we're just going to target within a 10-mile radius. Um, and then, yeah, the brand that we have too. Um, yeah, it does help with pre-ed PT, just attracting a certain clientele. And that's where even online stuff is helpful because it's like pre as a whole attracts people who tend to be like highly motivated, for example.
Exactly. Yeah, that's funny because actually like, leads me to my next question. So it's like, how have you seen our brand identity influence the type of clients that we attract, whether that's like for the online business or in person? Um, yeah, how do we feel like we've done that successfully?
Yeah, that's a good question because the online business, like let's take the Prehab app compared to the in-person clinic, are actually very similar. Like they're built on the same set of values, or almost like the same brand identity to a sense, but then it attracts very different people depending on what those people's needs are. So um, both of them, they are built on education, like empowering people and wanting people to be educated, and also autonomy, and basically people like taking control of their health. But they show up very differently in those two things. So with the app, obviously, like we're leveraging much more online marketing for that. And that is more framed around accessibility and, like breaking down barriers, giving access to everybody who needs it, and efficiencies like skipping the wait. That is going to naturally appeal to people who really value their health and are highly motivated, but they're also like DIYers, or maybe like they have an injury where they don't necessarily need to go in person. And so they want something reliable, but that they can do on their own time. Versus for our in-person clinic, similar route drives for these people and similar types of people, but either because of, just like where they are in their life, if they're located in LA, if they have more like money to spend, if they have insurance, or like depending on the injury they're dealing with, they want like highly personalized one-on-one care. They want to really go deep in their recovery and also build a relationship with their clinician. So they feel really like seen and supported. And I think that's a difference with the clinic. We lean much more on that. Like we show up as like coaches where they're going to get this like premium care over time, as opposed to the app leaning more on accessibility and things of that nature.
Yeah, I think what I like hearing when you talk about this is just like the difference in language, and like it's really about that voice that we just already kind of talked about a little bit earlier. Like even though when we do like discovery calls for the clinic, we we spend so much time just trying to to know them as people. I always tell people like when I'm doing like a discovery call, for example, like sometimes like I don't even learn that much about their injury, but I know a lot about them as a person. And I think that's what helps them get a sense of what it's like coming to see us, of like how personalized it really is. And that's something that if that person values that, they're going to see that in our first call. And then like that's what, translates into them converting as a client. Um, and then same thing with like even the verbiage as coaches and guides, like because that's how we brand ourselves, whether it's like on our website when we're talking to doctors, when we're talking to, high schools or whatever, like that naturally is going to attract motivated people because people who are very reliant on a healthcare provider are probably not really going to gravitate towards a coach. They're going to want someone who's going to like do all the work for them and like fix them, right? And if those types of people walk into our clinic, they are going to be severely disappointed because that's just like not how we operate. So I think making sure that we have the right language off the bat is so important because that's what's going to attract the right fit, which I think internally or inadvertently, I guess, results in better patient outcomes. Um, yeah, because if
Yeah.
you attract someone who like isn't like that, if someone comes into our clinic and wants craniosacral therapy and massages and all this stuff, like they're going to hate me probably. And they're also not going to get better because it's going to be like an uphill battle trying to like convince them of my methodology or like, trying to like bridge
Mhm.
that gap versus attracting an ideal clientele if we just can kind of get that across from the jump. Um, so yeah, I think that language is super important. And I think for the app, you were saying like the accessibility aspect is so important too. So like the language that we use, we have like the same mission, I think, right? Overall is like increasing access and high quality care. But the types of people we attract are different for the app than in person because of the language that we're using. Our voice is like actually different, even though we have like the same logo,
Yes,
right?
I think you're spot on with all of that. Like, I think that
Welcome to my TED Talk.
no, see, I'm like you should brand expert. The more clearly that your brand reflects you and what people can expect, I think, is just the more likely you are to attract the right people. So, like literally what you said, you don't want to attract people who are going to be dissatisfied with your care because their personal views on the service that you provide are different than what you actually provide. Um, you want to get specific as you can on how do you attract the right people who are in line with that, not having like a scarcity mindset. Because there's so many people out there. And if you appeal to everybody, you'll appeal to nobody really. It'll end up just being like a watered down, kind of like lukewarm thing that won't actually make much of an impact for you.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's really just like dawning on me. Like we literally have the same logo and have two different, completely different like services and just like two different points of view. It's really interesting. Wow, I've only been with the company for 5 years. I'm like just realizing
I
that.
know that's like a separate conversation on rebranding because it's like
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I've had that thought. Yeah, it can be a conversation for another time.
Yeah, we'll save that for a private conversation. But moving on. So, speaking of our prehab brand, what things do you think about when you I guess like created or working on the prehab brand as a whole, like whether it's the clinic, the app, or together? Like, is it like I know we've talked about like story branding, brand scripts, avatars, like where does all of that fall into play when we're like thinking about creating a brand?
Yeah. There's a lot of different aspects to it. And again, I will just say the caveat of like prehab being a good example of in the beginning, it was Mike, Craig, and Arsh, and they just started, but they always had like a clear why, but they didn't have all these frameworks.
Pause. My headphone fell. Okay. On brand. I'm back.
What was I saying? Yeah, in the beginning they were just posting right content because they were like, there's not a lot of good information out there. But they always had a clear why of wanting to make information accessible. And that has been, there's been continuity, like the whole time it stayed steady in that way. But as the company's grown, then it becomes more important to put these frameworks in place. So when it comes to like starting a brand, or I guess like working on a brand, I do like to start with story. That was probably the first like official brand work that we really started doing. I think storytelling is really, really important, and can be really powerful when done right. And we're still like learning, but I think starting with story is a good place.
What
Um,
do you mean when you say stories? Like, what does that mean to you?
yeah, so a lot of a lot of storytelling principles that people will tell you about in branding and marketing is the hero's journey. And we've used a framework really similar to that. It's called StoryBrand. I know you're familiar because I've dragged you into my work with it. But yeah, it's by Donald Miller wrote a book called StoryBrand, and then he developed a framework, and there's like courses and stuff on this. But essentially, they all talk about the same thing, and it's using principles from TV shows and movies and like classic cinema, where it's like you have a character in the beginning, and the character in this context, in the context of a brand, is your customer. Like they're like the hero of your story. They're a character and they have a problem. And then somewhere along the way, they meet a guide, which would be like the business or like us, right, as providers. And they help them to solve their problem basically. And throughout the whole thing, it's like transformation. That's really like the theme. And so when you're thinking about this in terms of your company, because I know that sounds kind of vague, it's like, how does that actually apply? It doesn't have to be too complicated. Like, even if you look up the story brand principles, it's going to get you to really break it down. But even just starting with these questions, like, who are they? Meaning, who are the people you want coming into your clinic, or who are the people that you want to attract? What do they want? What is their goal in the context of what your service or product provides? What's in their way? And that would be like the problem that they're facing. That's because any business, service, anything that exists solves a problem. And so you have to be very clear on what is in their way and how specifically do you help to get it. So who are they? What do they want? What's in their way? And then like, how do we help? Which is the transformation of them. And I think starting with those, once that becomes clear, everything can get filtered through that lens. And it makes it a lot easier to think about like, what should our messaging be, like you're talking about, like the language that you use? What are the visuals that are in line with that? What kind of tone do we want? And then you can create like as detailed as you want frameworks around that. And we've done that again over time, but I think just starting with that and keeping it simple can be really helpful.
I like that. I like that. I wonder if I'm sure like there'll be like an email or something that goes out after this, but maybe we can like send out like links to some of this stuff as well.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, I can
yeah.
definitely.
Um, okay, so if this, I mean, I think you already like broke it down as far as like keeping it simple with those like questions and, creating almost like an avatar, I guess might be something that sounds
Mhm.
maybe similar. Is that the same thing? Is that different? Is that like the beginning part of it essentially? And then you kind of build off of that?
Yeah, that would come first, you're right, because the avatar is your customer, and it's like before you can craft a story for them, you have to understand them. Avatars, if you look that up online, you can find a bunch of frameworks for that, but it's basically breaking down um, who you want to attract, like very granular levels, at least as granular as you can. And again, this all like first you have to have an understanding of what types of people you'd even want to attract. And then once you know that, like to bring it back, just because pelvic floor is such an easy one because it's a very specific niche group of people. Um, the things that they care about, like emotionally, from like an intellectual perspective, the kind of support they're looking for, that's all going to be so different compared to like a college athlete. And so if you have a specific like person in mind, then creating an avatar for them is basically breaking down, and you can get as specific as you want with this, but their age range, what their interest levels are. Some people even do like income levels. And I think what's been really helpful for us, because we have those avatars built out, it can sometimes be hard to apply. Um, the key thing there is to really like understand them. Like, where are they spending their time? What do they care about? What kind of language resonates with them? And so I've started doing this exercise of like, here are situations, and then our target avatar for the Prehab app, for example, like this is what they would think when these certain situations come up. I don't think you have to get that granular, but to your point, yeah, with avatars, that would definitely come first. Understand your customer, listen to them first, and then build out the story from there.
Yeah. I like that too because I'm thinking about like myself and like my patient population. So for myself, just for like awareness, like I kind of like inadvertently became this like niche specialist. It wasn't totally on purpose, but like it was just kind of like a niche that I was very passionate about and very vocal about. And so I actually just would jump on like my social media with like my hot takes about the nonsensical things that are happening in ACL rehab still to this day. And that's almost like how I like built my own personal brand. But all that to say is like when I think of like my ideal patient population and who I want to be treating, I know exactly like what their day looks like. I will think about it and I'll be like, okay, like from the second this person wakes up to when they go to bed, like my ideal patient population is someone who like, is going through like their ACL rehab. They work a full-time job. They don't have time to go to PT 2 to 3 days a week. They are not like a high school athlete or a college athlete who is in the gym 5 to 6 days a week training, right? So it's like they have to find time, even if it's as simple as like my hours. I'm like, I know these people like work full time. So like I know I have to be available and shift my hours later in the day to see them. Like all of these things like I take into account for myself and like our practice. Like if one of our PTs wants to work with high school athletes, like same idea, right? Like when are these people available? When can they see you? Like simple things like that actually go a long way in like attracting the right person, right? Because if you're like, oh, I specialize in like high school athletes, but I only treat from like 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., like best of luck seeing them. So branding is so much more than just like that. It's like it's integrated into like every single part of your practice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so glad you shared that story because that's so, and it's very organic the way that you found that. And I think that is often how it happens for people. Like, you're not going to know right off the bat. You're just going to start treating people if you're a PT. And then over time, you might figure out, okay, I like this more. Like, I tend to resonate with these people. And I think that makes me just think that for healthcare workers, don't overthink it too much because like hearing you talk about that, like you work with them directly, like your clients so well. I feel like that will come pretty intuitively for most people, at least over time as you start to like mature in your career.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, one more question before we dive into like Q&A stuff. Because I know that if we don't talk about content, people are gonna be like, what the hell are you guys talking about? Um, but how can brand identity guide content strategy specifically, even before you start like posting online or yeah, I guess like I think the two are so interclosely related in most people's minds. So how do the two kind of interact?
Yeah, I would always say start with what we were talking about earlier, which is like, what's your goal with posting? Um, I think that should come before anything else. Because again, if your goal is to grow an online community, very different things that you should be doing with your content compared to something where it's like, I just want to have a social profile so my patients can go there and I can have social proof and I can show like what my brand is about. Like those have very different goals. And so I think getting clear on that, but, assuming like you've got that down packed, you know what your goals are there, then yeah, like filtering all the work we talked about doing with brand, it's like filtering content through your brand in that way. So again, thinking back to like who do you want to speak to? Because again, if you speak to everybody, you speak to nobody. What do they care about? Like what would resonate with them? And a lot of it is going to be testing. I know a lot of the time people want very tactical advice. It's just hard to give that without knowing people's specific scenarios. And at least through all of this stuff with prehab, it's like social is changing fairly quickly, and a lot of it is experimentation. But a good place to start is like you understand your customer, you understand maybe the kind of content that they interact with, meet them there. Like figure out like first of all what platforms are they on because you don't need to be on every single platform, especially if it's just you. Like that is so overwhelming. There's no way that that'll be sustainable. If you're going after an older demographic, for example, Facebook could be a better place, even though it's like more unexpected. Um, compared to like an Instagram, but it just depends on like do a little bit of research on where the people you want to speak to are spending their time and then cater your content strategy to that platform. Try to figure out like just do a little bit of research or like scrolling or whatever to try to see like what kinds of content are people interacting with and then how can I make my spin on that. And after you've laid that foundation, it's thinking about like, because you've got a unique POV, you've got a story at this point, and then it's like, how do you put that spin on it and trying to systemize it? So like, I think it's really helpful for people to think about different content series. If, you know, like let's take Priya, for example, because very recently we figured out we weren't doing the best job of this. Something that we really believe in is people being able to have like access to good healthcare and taking control of their health and all this stuff. And a lot of our social content is just like, here are X amount of exercises for this. And so something recently that we've thought about is like, no, let's try to figure out how we can do better storytelling of like what we're actually about and like why we're posting this content and that kind of thing. Um, I know that's a tangent, but I think those series are like thinking of different types of ways you can like show up that feel comfortable to you, that feel not too like daunting or overwhelming to you. So they're like a little bit more palatable, I guess, because people have different preferences too and what kind of content they even want to do, whether they prefer
Yeah.
video content compared to written content. You should take that into account as well because it's only going to be sustainable if you enjoy it at least to a degree. Um,
Yeah. That's what I was gonna say too, because I was like, I feel like it's so much of like catering the platform to like what your audience, like where they're at, but also like what feels authentic to you. Because when it comes to social, like it's so time consuming that if you're not enjoying it even a little bit, like it's just gonna feel like a drag and you're not gonna be able to stay consistent. And I feel like consistency is like what it does matter on social. And like that doesn't mean necessarily like posting every day, but like having consistent engagement. Like for me, like I say for like my personal brand, like I don't post in feed very often, but like I'm more of like a story gal. Like, I might make an in feed post like once a month, but like I'm pretty regularly on my stories because that feels authentic to me and where I can share like my hot takes like more freely, right? Versus it feeling like overly produced. So I think it's like finding the right platform for your audience, but also like the platform that's going to be sustainable for you.
exactly. Yeah, that's really,
Yeah.
I completely
Yeah.
agree.
And of course, I just kept talking, and now we have like 3 minutes for Q&A. So, let's see what we have in the chats here. There's a Q&A. We talked about like not being in front of social. Would you recommend getting a business coach for brand building or support with socials? If yes, any recommendations? I guess like Kinsey is that for us in a way. I know I personally worked with like a business coach as well, but we didn't really work too much on branding. A lot of it, like, I guess inadvertently, was just talking about like my values. So when I worked with my business coach, we spent a lot of time figuring out like my values. Like I remember she gave me like a list, like a 2 page list of just like different values. And I was like, whoa, this is really overwhelming. I've never thought about that. But like when I did narrow it down, like it helped me a lot. Like it really helped me understand my own perspective a lot better. So I think in situations like that was really helpful for me just to get a better understanding of yourself more so than like branding. So that would be my take on that. Um Oh, this is a good one. Let's go. Okay, so Sarah asks, how much information do you really want on a website for your business, for instance? Should it be super basic, have multiple pages for people to explore? Should you have an about me, a page of your values? Like, what's the most important thing to have on a website?
Hmm. Yeah, I want to say it depends, but I won't say that.
That's such a PT answer, though, so it's actually totally fine. Like, that's literally what we say all the time. It depends.
Well, it does. It really does. But yeah, I think the most important thing is whatever you're trying to brand around or like whatever you're trying to market. So if that is your practice, like if you want to practice and that's what you want to do, it's the most important page is going to be information about that, but framed through the lens of the person looking at your page. So what can they expect from it? Like identifying all those storytelling things should kind of like feed into it of like what's the problem they're dealing with and how do you solve it and what makes you unique? Like what are things that make you stand out against it? I would start there. I think you can start with a simple website. Like there's no need to have anything super complex right off the bat or even worry about things like blogs or like adding all of this. I think like my overall sentiment with a lot of this, especially if you're just starting out, is keep it simple. And to your point on the last answer, understand yourself first, understand what you want, and keep it like in that lane to begin. You can always expand from there.
Yeah, yeah. I'd say the thing I would add is like if there's something that really makes you stand out, I think it's like worth adding. But like, not to say that like you as a clinician, it doesn't stand out on its own, but like I think of like Prehab PT, like something that we added to our website is like ACL Club. Cause like we run these like group trainings for like ACL for mid and late stage, which is something that like no one else that I know of in our area has done. Or we like do blood flow restriction, like which a lot of people specifically seek. So that all of this goes back to like who is your person and like what do they want, right? Because that ACLer is going to want that BFR rental early on, and that ACLer is going to want the group training mid and late stage. So I think it just all goes back to the same theme.
Totally.
Let's yeah, let's see if there's an okay, let's do one more. So, I understand that choosing the right platform for our audience is important. In general, which social media platform should we focus on to get the best results with our target audience age 30 to 60?
Oh, 30 to 60. I would probably say Instagram's a good place. Um, I'd be curious to know what their goal is again with their socials, because actually, this is maybe like a hot take. Take this with a grain of salt for sure.
I
Um,
can't wait.
if you have a local business, I actually think the best social media platform as a whole is TikTok. Again, take it with a grain of salt because I think this is a little bit more relevant for like entertainment-based things and like restaurants. But to my knowledge, TikTok's the only platform that actually shows to a group of people regionally first. That's a huge advantage for local businesses. I don't know if you guys notice when you're on TikTok compared to other social platforms. If you travel around or even just like in your own city, like for you in LA, I'm sure you see posts that are like 5 best coffee shops in LA all the time. That's pretty unique to TikTok because of the fact that they start regionally. So it can go viral and then obviously it's not going to be local, but there's a huge advantage to it starting locally. The only thing with that is for this individual's question with 30 to 60, I would actually have to look into what because these social platforms start young and then over time they evolve and they have older demographics. I'm not sure what the current up-to-date demographic info is on TikTok, so maybe look into that. But like my gut instinct as far as like the age range would be like Instagram, even a little bit of Facebook. But local business, I would say TikTok.
Yeah, I actually really like that because that's so true. And I see people in like their 50s and 60s. I have like this lady pops up on my TikTok who's like DJing with her pots and pans. I don't know if you've seen her, but she's phenomenal. She's not local, but she's in her 60s.
No,
So
you're right.
she's on TikTok.
I think to say that is just young people on TikTok is like, that's no longer the case. Yeah.
No, my mom has a TikTok.
Yeah.
Um, awesome. Okay, well, as we wrap things up for today, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining me. I was like a little nervous for like my inaugural session, so it's so nice to have you here, like a little piece of prehab home during our first office hours. Obviously, like branding, like we said at the beginning, is not something that we're taught in school, but plays a huge role when it comes to the success of our practice. So thank you for sharing your insights. Um, with that being said, I'm excited to be here for the next 6 months, so essentially like the remainder of 2025 with you all. And I hope everyone will join me next month when I will be chatting with Leanne Wood and Alicia Murray, talking about all first things when deciding to scale your business. So whether you're thinking like about your first hire, opening a second location, anything in between, we'll be covering all of like those initial thoughts and questions for you when you start to like think about the next big thing that you're doing. So thank you again for joining. If you want to register for that, I believe the link should already be in the chat. And I look forward to seeing you all next month. Bye, everybody.
Bye.